We all want to acknowledge the service and sacrifice of Sergeant Eric Hauk, Sergeant William Bays, and Corporal Dylan Baldridge. These three soldiers from the Army's 101st Airborne Division were killed this weekend in Afghanistan. The thoughts and prayers of this committee are with their loved ones. The sacrifice of these heroes is a painful reminder that America is still a nation at war. That is true in Afghanistan, where after 15 years of war, we face a stalemate and urgently need a change in strategy and an increase in resources if we are to turn the situation around. We also remain engaged in a global campaign to defeat ISIS and related terrorist groups from Libya and Yemen to Iraq and Syria, where U.S. troops are helping to destroy ISIS and reclaim Mosul and Raqqa. Meanwhile, threats around the world continue to grow more complex and severe. North Korea is closing in on the development of a nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile that can target our homeland. And Iran continues to destabilize the Middle East and seek to drive the United States out of the region. At the same time, we've entered a new era of great power competition. Russia and China, despite their many differences, are both modernizing their militaries, developing advanced capabilities to undermine our ability to project power globally, threaten their neighbors, and challenging the rules-based world order. Russia, in particular, continues to occupy Crimea, destabilize Ukraine, threaten our NATO allies, bolster the murderous Assad regime in Syria, and pursue a campaign of active measures to undermine the very integrity of Western democracies. With thousands of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines deployed in harm's way around the globe, those of us who are charged with the awesome responsibility of providing for the common defense must ask ourselves if we are doing everything possible to support our brave men and women in uniform to meet the challenges of an increasingly dangerous world and succeed in their mission. I'm sad to say that we are not. In response to rising threats, we have asked our military to do more and give more, but have given less and less to them. Our witnesses' opening statements are a harsh indictment of this failure, but they are right. I implore my colleagues to listen carefully to their testimony and heed their admonition to us. Since 2011, spending caps mandated by the Budget Control Act have led to a 23% cut to the defense budget. These reductions, compounded by growing fiscal uncertainty and continuing resolutions, have left our military with shrinking forces, depleted readiness, and aging equipment. This has put the lives of our men and women in uniform at greater risk, as this committee has heard in testimony for years from our civilian defense leaders and senior military officers. The administration's fiscal year 2018 budget requests, if enacted, could help to arrest the decline in our military's readiness, but ultimately, and unfortunately, it falls short of the President's commitment to rebuild our military. The proposed defense budget of $603 billion is both arbitrary and inadequate. Arbitrary because the top line is simply what was written into the Budget Control Act 6 years ago, prior to the sequester cuts, and inadequate because it represents just a 3% increase over President Obama's defense plan. It is hardly surprising, then, that this committee has received lists of unfunded requirements from the military services totaling over $31 billion, all of which Secretary Mattis testified last night in the House Armed Services Committee that he supports. Our military service leaders have testified to this committee that this budget would staunch the bleeding, but we owe our men and women in uniform more than that. It's been said that this budget request focuses on readiness, and it is true that the requested funding increases would make the current force more ready for the next year. But ultimately, readiness is more than training hours and time on the ranges. Real readiness requires sufficient capacity to enable our troops simultaneously to conduct operations, prepare for deployment, rest and refit, and focus on the challenges of tomorrow. This budget delivers no growth in capacity, which means that the joint force will continue to consume readiness as quickly as it is produced. These increases in capacity are reflected in each service's unfunded requirements. True readiness is also modernization, because if we mortgage future capability pay for present commitments, we have achieved little, especially at a time when our adversaries are moving at an alarming rate to erode America's military technological advantage and call into question our ability to project power. Here too, unfortunately, this budget request poses the old false choice between readiness and modernization. The fact is that $603 billion simply is not enough to pay for both priorities, which is why the service's unfunded requirements are heavy on the procurement of new and additional capabilities that are desperately needed. All of this presents this committee and this Congress with a significant choice. The administration's budget request is just that, a request. Ultimately, it is our independent responsibility to authorize and appropriate funding for our military at levels and in ways that we believe sufficient to provide for the common defense. I believe that this budget request is a start, but we can and must do better. This will not be possible, however, as long as the Budget Control Act remains the law of the land. This defense budget request and the additional funding that our military needs is literally illegal under the Budget Control Act. This law has done severe damage to our military. It has harmed the department's ability to plan and execute budgets effectively and efficiently. It has ground the Congress's budget and appropriations processes to a halt. And worst of all, there are 4 more years of BCA caps to go. We cannot go on like this. Our men and women in uniform deserve better. It is time for the Congress to reinvest in our military, restore readiness and capabilities, rebalance our joint force, and renew America's military advantage. To do so, we must revise or repeal the Budget Control Act, and we must give our troops what they need to succeed today and in the future. Will the politics of this be difficult? Yes. But the question all of us here must answer is, how much longer will we send our sons and daughters into harm's way, unprepared, before we get over our politics and do our jobs?